Hi there, guys. Welcome to the lesson. Here we're going to talk specifically about the blueprint interface, okay? And the best way to do this is to create a new blueprint. So that's exactly what we'll do, and we'll talk you through the details, okay? So that's exactly what we'll do, and we'll talk you through the details. I'm here now in Unreal Engine 5, and I'm using the first person template. I've created a new project. I haven't changed anything. I've not adapted anything at all. It's just as it comes, the first person template here. So we're going to use this to start from scratch. Now here in Unreal Engine 5, to bring up the content browser, we use Control and Spacebar, and it brings it up just like this. Now I've created a folder called BP ArcViz, which is where we'll save the course materials, okay? So if you're ready, let's go. To create a blueprint, all you have to do is right click, and then right at the top, you can see blueprint class, or over here, you can press add, and at the top, blueprint class. Either way is fine. Here, it gives us a window asking us what type of blueprint we want to create. So you can see that there are quite a few different types of blueprints that we can create, some of which we'll talk about later. But let's create one with the actor blueprint, and we'll name it. We'll name it starting with BP underscore. And a good point to tell you here is that Epic Games recommends that all blueprints begin with the initials BP and then the underscore. So let me just add interface. So our blueprint has been created. I'll double click to open it. So here we'll have this window that's almost like a viewport of what our blueprint will look like visually. Now, every time you create a blueprint, it's like a mini project within our project. So it's treated by Unreal as something independent, okay? Now we can add many things to our blueprint within this editor. It's really cool. A nice and easy way to work visually, as we said in the previous videos. And this is going to store many features such as a static mesh. We can include a video, audio, and much more within the blueprint here. So here we have this viewport in front of us, which is like the viewport window of the main editor. Now, in the viewport, there's a mesh, and we also have here a short overview of what we're adding to the blueprint. So let's just familiarize ourselves before we go too deep later on in the course. The first item that I want to talk to you about is the component window over here. So what's the component window? Well, this is where we'll add components to our blueprint, different features, okay, or different actors. So if we check the add tab, we can see that there are several different types of objects that we can add to our blueprint. Some of them are specifically for programming, but basically we have many good features here to use. A static mesh, for example, lights or audio. Now, for us, in our case, if we want to create a blueprint with one of these components, we just need to add them from the list. Now, it's not mandatory, of course. There are blueprints that don't have any components in it. So then here we have the hierarchy of the objects. So this is the BP underscore interface itself at the top. Then underneath, there's this default scene root. So what's that? Well, this is an element that cannot be selected, cannot be moved. It doesn't have any dimensions. You can zoom in, zoom out. Nothing happens to it, okay? So it's just a reference for you to work with the blueprint. And it's always positioned at the 0 point of the blueprint. It's like the pivot point of blueprint. So when we add the blueprint into the editor, the pivot will always be at 0, 0, 0, right? Here in the components list, I can add, for example, a static mesh. So I've added that now. I can rename it as well if I want to. Obviously, there's nothing there. We can see that nothing's changed. The coordinates haven't been affected, but we have added a 3D element to the blueprint. So we can add in one of the static meshes from within our project here. And here we have the mesh itself, this pillar. Now, since it's not the default blueprint route, we can move it around. Okay. So it's a movable object within the viewport. Let me just demonstrate the pivot placement, which is really interesting. I'll just close this and let's open here, and there's our blueprint. Put it into the scene. And here we can see the pivot where the default scene route is. And if I open this, let me open it so we can just do it in real time. Go back to viewport. So we can see it side by side. You see, as I'm moving it, what's happening? So it's moving according to the blueprint 0 point, but in the scene, it moves according to the pivot 0, which is the pivot scene route. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at another feature. Now here in the hierarchy, we can see that how it's all laid out when we add a component. You get basically a list of importance. So if we add a point light here in the scene, this sits just underneath the static mesh. So I can move it. I can move it quite freely. Fine, no problem there. But if I move the static mesh, if I click on the static mesh now and move that, it also moves the point light with it as well. You see that? Why does it do that? Well, basically because it's attached in list of the hierarchy. Okay. So if I want to change it, I can just click and drag and move it in the position. So it works similar to how things are parented to different assets. Okay, so what if I don't want the default scene route on my blueprint? What if I want to add something else as my pivot? Well, I can just click and drag and it removes the default scene route. But just bear in mind that now it's locked, okay? So you can't move it independently. So it's just something to be aware of. I don't normally tend to use it. I normally tend to leave the default scene route in because otherwise it's constantly locked. So here we've got the components window, and the components window allows us to do some cool things, add things in. Below we've got my blueprint. Here you have many blueprint programming elements listed. We'll go into more detail about how we can use them later. We also have the events below, the event graphs, which we'll talk about later too. We can create some functions, macros, and some famous variables, which we'll use a lot. We'll go over all of this in much more detail later. On the right hand side, we have the details panel, which is exactly like the one in the editor. If you open an object, it shows the details of the object here, as we're familiar with. If I go back to the light here, we can see the details that pertain to the light, just as we have in the editor. And then down here, we have the compilation results, the compiler, okay? So every time we create something that's new in a blueprint, we have to compile it. And that's because Unreal will analyze all that we've done and it will check it to make sure it works. And it will highlight any programming areas or anything that's been put together incorrectly or something that's not connected right, and it will let us know. So every time we compile, it will show the results down here. What else then? So here is a viewport window, which is similar to the editors we've shown. We can use the top, left, and lit features as well. We have this construction script, which is basically a function that is a standard function. We can't delete this, okay? So it's mandatory. You have to have a construction script in your blueprint. So what does it do? Well, it creates a function, a line of programming before we go into play mode, because most blueprints work from the moment you click play in your project. When the game starts, this construction script works kind of like this. It creates some variables before you actually start the game. You can view it as it's building the ability to for the blueprint to work. Now, we won't be using this because for us, it's rarely used in ArcViz experiences. The main thing we'll be using in the blueprints is the event graph, which is where all the nodes are, and the ones we talked about at the beginning, which is where basically all the magic happens. Everything we do in terms of programming is all here. So here's where we'll spend most of our time with the nodes, and we'll be able to start working out what happens when we begin an event, such as this one here, the event begin play. We have other nodes here, how we can affect what happens when we overlap an area in the experience, and also when we click on certain things. But we'll talk about all of that in much more detail later on. Here we have our toolbar, and here is where we have the compile button, and we're going to be using that quite a lot during our course. This is what compiles everything, so it lets you know if everything is working, everything makes sense, and as we said, it gives us the results. And the save button as well, so we want to save everything quite frequently, don't we? Everything that we've been adjusted in the blueprint, and it works separately from the project. It just specifically saves the blueprint, okay? So if I save a blueprint and close Unreal, even if I don't save the project, the blueprint will still use the latest from the last time it was saved, okay? Just in case you want to go back. So it's a good thing to be aware of that. So up here we have the play button, which is the same as the play button in the main editor. If I click play here, it's going to run the game, but it's going to show me in simulation mode what's happening in the game, okay? So I'll be able to visually see how the blueprints are working. And we'll talk about this simulation method further on in the course as well, because it's very important and it's really useful for us to be able to understand. So basically, that's it now for this class. In the next class, we'll go a little deeper. Okay, see you soon.